Hey class, we're going to take a look at how to make best use of our textbook. It's early on in the school year, and I know that you've used science textbooks and other textbooks in the past, but sometimes we need a little bit reminder on how best to use our textbook. Science textbooks are complex in that there's a lot going on, and sometimes students have a tendency just to kind of skip over some of the most important parts of the book of itself. So what we're going to do is take a look at how you would want to go about moving into a new chapter and a new unit and progressing through a reading assignment so that you can make the best use of it. Remember, as we talked about in class, when you're given a reading assignment, you don't want to just read through it just to say that you've done it. You want to make sure that you've read it, to make sure that you've learned from what you've read, and to make sure that you've understood the content so that you can come into class and be an active participant in a discussion about what we have read. Okay, so as an example, this is chapter 22, excuse me. We see the title of it is Biomes and Ecosystems, and we look at the picture here, kind of a cool picture. It looks interesting. And then we can come down to the bottom here, and there's a little bit of inquiry that tells us about it. Every chapter starts this way. We can also see that there's a big idea. Okay, so this one is how do Earth's biomes and ecosystems differ? That's something that we're going to want to think about, and hopefully by the time we're done with this chapter, we're able to answer this big idea question. If we move a little bit further, there's some getting ready to read. So you would want to read through these. Okay, if you're a good reader and you really wanted to make sure you're making the best of the assignment, you'd want to read through these getting ready to reads. Okay, some interesting information in there. It's not going to take you very long to do that, but it will pay big dividends. Okay, now we have the first lesson. The textbook breaks up the chapters into different lessons. There's usually 3 lessons per chapter. Sometimes there's 2, and on an occasion there might even be, 4 lessons. Okay, this first lesson here is titled Land Biomes, and every lesson is going to have your key concepts, and that starts with essential questions. Before you begin reading the lesson, read the essential question. Think about that essential question, or essential questions. In this case, there's 2. How do Earth's land biomes differ? And how do humans impact land biomes? You want to think about those essential questions as you're reading through the lesson. And by the time you're done with the lesson, you should be able to come back and answer those 2 questions, those 2 essential questions in depth. Okay, the next thing you're going to do before you start reading is go through the vocabulary, with the first word being biome, and then the last word being tundra. You'd want to go through each one of these, say them out loud, and make sure you're able to pronounce them. And then again, here's another inquiry. We're going to want to look at this picture. We're going to read what it says here, and that should get us ready to move forward and begin reading. So I know a lot of students have a tendency when they get to a reading assignment, they would just quickly page through it and look to see how much there actually is. Okay, so there's several pages in this lesson, but there's a lot of pictures and a lot of charts and a lot of diagrams. So some students might be like, all right, cool, there's not that much to read. I'm going to breeze through this. But if you take that attitude and you just read the content, you're going to be missing a whole lot. Okay, the science textbook has a whole lot of what we call features. Features being illustrations, graphics, data tables, charts, graphs, the captions that go along with the images, and everything else that goes along with the science book. So if you skip those features, you're going to be missing a whole lot of important content. So it's extremely, extremely important that you as a student, and a student who wants to be a good reader and read to be successful and read to learn, that you take the time to look at and study and think about how the different features, in this case an image, relates back to what you have read. Okay? But let me just backtrack a little bit. Before you begin reading, it's always a good idea, and I've always found this helpful with the science book, to go through and look at all the major headings. In this case it says land, ecosystems, and biomes. And I see desert biome, I see biodiversity, human impact. I'm going to go to the next page. Look at the top, I see grassland biomes, I see biodiversity and human impact. Next I see tropical rainforest, and I see again biodiversity, human impact. Temperate rainforest biome, biodiversity and human impact. And then temperate deciduous forest with, again, biodiversity and human impact. And taiga biome, biodiversity, human impact. Then we see the tundra biome, biodiversity, human impact. So what we're getting at here is we're going to see a trend as we read through this lesson. So there's not going to be many surprises coming up. I'm going to see that each biome is going to focus on both biodiversity and human impact. So hopefully I understand what biodiversity means, and hopefully that's something I learned previous to reading this. If I were to go into this lesson to read this and I did not know what biodiversity meant, as a good reader, I would take the time to first look up the word biodiversity so that I would know what it is I am reading as I go along. Otherwise, I might be left in the dark. Okay, so now that I've read all the major headings, I'm going to begin reading. So I would read, and I get to one of my vocabulary words, and maybe I'd take some notes about this vocabulary word, or maybe I'm taking notes the whole time I'm reading. Okay. Eventually I'm going to get to where it says figure 1. I'd want to stop at the end of the sentence, come back to figure 1, take a good look at it, make sure I'm digesting it and thinking about how it relates back to what I've just read. If I don't understand how the image, in this case figure 1, relates back to what I've read, a good idea, or what a good reader would do, would go back and reread and think about how they relate. And if you can't figure out how they relate, it would be a good idea to write down a note to yourself so you can come into school the next day and ask me or ask your teacher, whoever that teacher might be. Okay, as I keep going, there's mini labs throughout your textbook. Some of these mini labs we might do in school, others they're things that you could do at home. It doesn't hurt you to read through the mini labs to get an understanding of what is going on and then think about how it relates to what you're reading. Okay. In this case, there's an image here. It's showing some woodpeckers. Now, the text doesn't tell you to go back and look at these woodpeckers, and it just says woodpeckers. It doesn't give a whole lot of information, but it just gives you an idea. It paints a picture of a type of organism that would be in that biome. Okay. If we go down here, there's a graph. It would be really important that you take the time to try to interpret that graph. Since we see the same type of graph over and over again when we previewed the text, we're going to make a mental note that those graphs are probably important, and we better not skip over them. We better try to interpret them and figure out what those graphs are telling us. Okay. Again, we're going to start to see more of the same. Okay. It's very important to stop, look at the pictures, think about how they relate to the text, make notes of what you don't understand, make notes of what you think you're going to need to remember, what's important, and interpret the graphs. Okay? Now that you've gotten to the end, there will be a lesson review. There's these visual summaries. It would be a great idea to go through these visual summaries just to recap what you've read. And you can take the time to answer the review questions. Oftentimes we'll work on them together in class. But if we go back, now that I've finished reading, to make sure I know what I've read and I understand what I've read, I want to go back to these essential questions and take the time to write out my answers to them to make sure that I can fully and in-depth give an in-depth answer to each one of them. And if I can, then I probably understand about the land biomes. It would also be a good idea to go back through the vocabulary and give yourself a quick quiz, because vocabulary in science is a very crucial part of our understanding. So yes, we have to memorize vocabulary, because if we don't remember the vocabulary, then we're not going to be able to use those key words when we're discussing in class or when we're writing up to a writing prompt or just answering a question that might have one of those terms in it. Okay, so remember, preview the text, read the key concepts with the essential questions in the vocabulary, make sure you pay attention to all the images and all the captions that go along with them and think about how they relate to the text. And then finally, after you've read, go back to the vocabulary, go back to the essential questions, and quiz yourself. All right, folks, I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much.